This is probably one of the most favourite vehicles that we have within the museum, especially for Ozama Fest. So this is the Czechoslovakian built T72M or M1, because there's a couple of different changes within the Czech built vehicle. What I want to focus on today is more looking on the armour side of it, so both glacis plate and turret. So the glacis plate is really interesting. The CIA did a paper on this vehicle back in August of 1982. They actually had a Syrian T72M, which the Israelis have obviously got their hands on. When they did the analysis on this, they found that at the front here we had an 80mm high hardness steel plate going up to about 340 BHN. Then we had 105mm of what they initially thought was compressed polyurethane, and it was said to have about 1/4 the density of steel. This is later changed to be with a product what we call Textilite. So Textilite is a glass-based armour in between the top layer of armour and the back layer of armour. It comes in two layers. The first layer is about 65mm thick and the second is 40mm thick. So what we have is multiple layers of armoured glass in a resin, and we place that behind the 80mm of armour, and then we have another 20mm of armour behind that. The whole glacis plate was made in one piece and then welded into the vehicle. So when we look at the actual angle of the glacis plate, this gives us a line of sight now of about 572mm. It actually gives us good properties against our chemical warheads, so high explosive anti-tank and high explosive squash head, especially with the angle, with incoming heat, because a lot of the older Western heat rounds had a spin rotation on them as well, so when they would hit, they would obviously generally try and spin off, so you didn't get good penetration. So what we have is essentially a ditching blade, so we can create a ditch in front of the tank. Now this is lowered manually by the crew, so they undo the clamps here. They would generally get a long crowbar and lower it down. So the thickness of his is about 21mm. As the blade comes down, the rods push back and they seat in a recess. So the blade will only come down to a certain point. It was said to be able to dig yourself in anywhere sort of up to the 20-minute mark, depending on the type of ground that you're in. They could do it in 5 minutes if they've got nice soft ground as well. So you'll generally have the commander out of the vehicle, given driver directions as to go forwards and backwards as well. So essentially it does give you a little bit more extra armour on the front, but it's meant to be to create a ditch in front of the vehicle.
Like a little dozer blade.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
So the gun fitted to the T72 on all variants was 125mm. Said to be the D81TM gun, essentially, which sort of morphed into the 2A46. The 2A46 we can tell because it has the thermal jacket along the length of the barrel. Thermal jackets, obviously, in a cold winter, would have an effect where it keep the heat uniform around the barrel when the barrel's hot and we get a cold wind or snow sitting on the barrel. The thermal jacket actually provides uniform temperature, so we don't get barrel bend. Now, there was some documents that do state that this gun could punch through 40cm of reinforced concrete. So it'll actually punch through a wall. Now, if anybody can confirm or deny this, that'd be really good. So the gun within itself, when it fires, the recoil with this one goes back to about 330mm. So it recoils quite far back into the turret. So it's actually, when we look at Leopard, we're only sort of talking about the 240, I think, millimeters in recoil. But the interesting thing about this one, it doesn't have a mantlet. So there's no heavy mantlet at the front as such, because then to have a heavier mantlet, we've got to have a heavier breech to balance that out as well. So we just have our dust cover around the actual barrel itself, and it's recessed back into the turret. Now with this one, I said it's sort of a Czechoslovakian built, so we have a sort of mixture of M and M1 features. So along both sides, we have the 81mm Tusha smoke grenades. So these we would essentially see on Soviet vehicles from T-72A onwards. When they're loaded, they can't fire these smoke grenades when the hatches are open because it breaks the firing circuit. So really good, interesting for a safety feature as well. We can see the infrared and white light searchlight. Now if we look back to T64, the T64 had it on the right side of the gun mountlet. Now in the information that I've got, it actually says that the sight was mounted on the right hand side next to the coaxial machine gun. So this prevented the driver from actually standing up in front of the machine gun. This is the TPD K1 laser sight. And if you look straight in, you can see there's two distinct colours. So on the left, as we look at it, this is the laser sight component. Now the laser sight was said to be accurate up to 3,000 metres of plus or minus 10 metres with the laser. After 3,000 metres, it goes out to about 15%. So the accuracy of the range can affect the accuracy of your ammunition as well. So for armour-piercing fin stabilised discarding sabot, you start to increase large errors in your shooting over 3,000 metres, but for high explosive and heat, it's not so bad. On the right-hand side of that sight is the actual sighting system that he looks through. Back and to the right, we have another little infrared searchlight there. So next to it, you can see behind an armoured cover, this is his night sight, so the TPN 14923 night sight. This was initially compared by the Americans to be one of their downfalls early on. The M60's night sight was a little bit better than this one at the time when this came out. Magnification was quite good at about 5.5. I think Chieftain came in at about 3, but then again the Chieftain had a wider field of view. It's said that they could pick up a tank-sized target at 800 metres with this sight. So again, with further development, sight's improved a lot better in the IR range. The only problem is if you're using your infrared beam in conjunction with your night sight, if any other opponent has got infrared detection capabilities, they can pick up that beam as well. So from the CIA report, one of the key things that they wanted to find out was the thickness of the frontal armour of the T72. An interesting way that they found this out was if we have a look at the PKT machine gun aperture here, with inside the turret, the Americans found that they could use the PKT mount itself as a reference point. So the reference point that they have was about 680 millimetres. From there, they figured out a fixed point of 380 millimetres. Taking those measurements into consideration, they come up with an estimate that the turret thickness would be about 514 millimetres thick. The M and the M1, they were the first export models to have a composite filler inside the turret. Now this is called Kvarts. Kvarts is a sintered quartz, so we have a quartz compound and then we use heat, I think it's about 1200 degrees Celsius with pressure, and we make blocks of composite armour. Within the process of casting the turret, these blocks are placed in the sand mould. I've got some chalk marks that I've put on the turret here. So this is a steel bar that goes through this composite material. It's held in place and then the cast armour is poured around it. So this gives a thickness of about 114 millimetres. The Russians did, I think it even might have been the Polish, fired a 3 BM9 armour piercing round at one of these turrets, and it only penetrated about 175 millimetres in, and it actually got to, I think, penetrate only about 1 inch of the Kvarts composite armour. A feature of the T72 is we get rid of our manual loaders, which we have on Western tanks. So we have now fitted a auto loader. The auto loader on this particular vehicle was said to fire up to 3,000 rounds without failure. It's done automatically when the ammunition is selected. There is a carousel underneath the gun. So this holds 22 rounds. We hold 39 all up, so there's more rounds that are loaded loosely around the turret itself and around the hull. But under the carousel is 22 rounds. With this, they have a mixture. Generally, they'll have majority of armour piercing, followed by heat, a couple of rounds, and then HESH. And they'll generally load these together, so each round can be fired one after another. In saying that, if they need to change ammunition, they can manually unload the gun. To do this, they'd open up the breech, they'd pull the the charge bag out with the end cap, and then they'd have to reach through and pull out the main armament round. So it is a two-piece round that they load. The mechanical auto loader can be loaded by hand if one of the components fails, so either the carousel or the actual mechanism to raise the round. And this can be done by the commander. So to his rear left, he has a ratchet mechanism, which is located just behind him. He unlocks it. Now, before he does that, by his feet, he has two handles, and these are a brake, so he's got to pull these up. This prevents the carousel from spinning around. From there, with his left hand, we open up the covers to expose the carousel. As he winds it up, the round and the charge bag come up together. Now, as this gun is in its locked position at the moment, the stub catcher won't lift up, so we're going to get it to this point here. From there, the commander can, using a little plunger, he can actually push the round all the way through. He'll then lower the charge bag down to that level, and he'll push the charge bag in as well with the plunger. And that stub that's on the end, which holds the charge bag, will trip the extractors and the breech will close. Now, as we fire the gun, as it's recoiling back, the stub is ejected and is caught in the stub catcher. As the new round, which is already seated in the autoloader ready to go, comes up, the stub catcher arm lifts up, the hatch is opened here by a mechanical linkage, and that stub is ejected out. The stub can also be removed by the crew if necessary. Yeah, there's one particular myth about the autoloader that sort of still comes around every now and then, is that early autoloaders had a habit of ripping arms off. If you look at it in the safety sense of it, both the commander and the gunner have these shields. Now, there's essentially no way, unless they're doing something really silly, that they could ever get their arms ripped off by the mechanism of the autoloader. Hence why we have the shields. Now, as we know, with inside this turret, it's quite cramped. Most Soviet crewmen were said to fit in this vehicle anywhere between 5'4" and 5'9", with an average of 5'7". The gunner seat that you're sitting on at the moment doesn't move. However, the commander's seat, I can hold up and lower myself down. So I'm at the base level now. If you don't want to be too tall, because once you close the commander's hatch and the gunner's hatch, especially with the handle there, you're going to be hitting your head on the hatch. So 5'9", I would say, would be the tallest you'd probably want to be. The driver, on the other hand, when you compare the volume of space that he has in his position, it's said to be about 2 square meters of volume that he has in that driver's position, which is said to be a little bit more than, say, M60, comparable at the time. And the ergonomics of his driving position, the position of the pedals are a lot lower than what we see, especially say on Leopard, where the pedals can be a lot higher as well. So when we're talking about crew comfort, the Soviets said that their position was a lot more comfortable, especially to drive in. This vehicle is fantastic to drive. For speed, it's not as fast as the Leopard, and with the actual driving itself, it has a 7-speed synchro box. So you've got to go through each gear, but you don't need to actually, once you use the clutch to go into first, you don't need to use the clutch to go into any other gears forward and back until you want to stop as well. So a very easy vehicle to drive. This is an iconic vehicle. Last weekend in August this year, Oz Armour Fest. Get in quick, get yourself on this vehicle and go for a ride.